a small town where cobblestone streets wind between Victorian houses, there exists a photograph. Faded sepia tones capture 8 children frozen in a moment of joy from the summer of 1908. Their smiles beam through time, preserved in an image almost forgotten, until someone noticed what was in the 5th child's right pocket. The camera pans slowly across the weathered photograph as we begin our story, not of the photograph itself, but of the day it was taken. The day that changed everything in the quiet town of Millbrook. The summer of 1908 arrived with unusual intensity in Millbrook, the kind of heat that made the horizon shimmer and wooden porches creak. The town had one foot planted firmly in the old century and another tentatively stepping into the new. Horse-drawn carriages still outnumbered motor cars, though the occasional automobile would sputter down Main Street, causing horses to rear and children to point in wonder. 8 children gathered that morning at the old oak tree that marked the entrance to Whitaker Woods. The tree had stood for generations, its sprawling branches offering respite from the relentless July sun. The children arrived one by one, each from different corners of Millbrook, united by the simple joy of a summer's day free from obligations. First came Thomas Whitaker, the mayor's son, with his polished shoes and neatly combed hair that would inevitably become disheveled by day's end. At 12 years old, he carried himself with the premature dignity bestowed upon him by his father's position. He was the unofficial leader of their group, though he wore the title with an easy grace that made the others forget they were following at all. "Good morning, Thomas," called Mrs. Henderson from her garden as he passed. "Tell your mother her preserves were simply divine." "I will, Mrs. Henderson," he replied with a tip of his cap, a gesture mimicking his father's customary greeting. Thomas reached the oak tree and set down his satchel, extracting a small bundle wrapped in waxed paper, sandwiches his mother had prepared for his lunch. As he settled against the tree trunk, he spotted Lillian Ross approaching from the direction of the church. Lillian, with her chestnut braids and freckled nose, was the parson's daughter. At 11, she carried a quiet seriousness about her that occasionally broke into surprising bursts of mischief. She wore a simple blue dress with a white pinafore, her Sunday best reserved for another day. "Hello, Thomas," she said with a small smile. "Has anyone else arrived?" Before Thomas could answer, they heard the unmistakable sound of bickering. The Wilson twins, James and Joseph, rounded the corner, arguing animatedly about something inconsequential as 10-year-old brothers often do. Identical in appearance with their straw-colored hair and matching suspenders, they were nevertheless opposites in temperament. James was thoughtful and cautious, while Joseph charged headlong into adventure without consideration for consequences. "It was my turn to bring the marbles," James insisted, clutching a small cloth bag. "You lost 3 of them last time," Joseph countered. "Mother said I could be in charge." "Mother said no such thing." Their argument dissolved as they noticed Thomas and Lillian watching with amusement. The twins offered simultaneous greetings before joining them under the oak shade. Minutes later, Eleanor Blackwood appeared, walking with careful precision as though invisible judges were scoring her posture. The daughter of the town's physician, Eleanor carried herself with the dignified air of someone acutely aware of social standings. Her dress was immaculate, her black hair arranged in perfect ringlets under a white bonnet. At 12, she was already practicing to be the lady her mother expected her to become. "Good morning," she said formally, placing her small purse beside her as she smoothed her skirts and sat on a protruding root of the oak. Then came Sarah Miller, the shopkeeper's daughter, with windswept hair and a perpetual smudge of dirt on her cheek despite her mother's best efforts. At 9, she was the second youngest of the group, but often the most daring. She carried a skipping rope and a boundless energy that seemed to radiate from her slight frame. "I saw a motor car on Main Street," she announced breathlessly as she joined them. It was bright red and made the most tremendous noise. Mrs. Pemberton's cat nearly jumped out of its skin. The children laughed at her animated description, the image of the prim Mrs. Pemberton's pampered cat in distress particularly amusing. The 7th to arrive was Robert Jenkins, who preferred to be called Bobby. The blacksmith's son had inherited his father's broad shoulders, but none of his seriousness. At 11, he was already known throughout Millbrook for his infectious laugh and seemingly endless supply of jokes. He arrived carrying a small wooden box, which immediately drew the group's attention. "What's that you've got there, Bobby?" Thomas asked, eyeing the box with interest. Bobby grinned mysteriously. "Something special," he said, tucking the box into his jacket pocket. "You'll see later." The group's attention shifted as the 8th and final member appeared on the path. Peter Crawford was the youngest at 8 years old, the son of the town's librarian. Small for his age, with spectacles that seemed too large for his face, he carried a book under one arm, as he always did. "Sorry I'm late," he said softly. "Father was showing me a new book about ancient Egypt." The group was now 7, but they were still missing one, the 5th child when counted in order of age. They waited under the oak, their conversation drifting between topics as children's conversations often do, eyes occasionally glancing toward the path from town. "Do you think he's coming?" Sarah finally asked, voicing what they'd all been wondering. As if summoned by her question, a figure appeared on the path. Michael Hargrove walked toward them with an unhurried gait. At 10 years old, he was neither the oldest nor the youngest, neither the loudest nor the quietest. There was something distinctly ordinary about Michael, which perhaps made the extraordinary things that happened around him all the more unsettling. "Hello," Michael said simply as he joined the circle. He wore plain brown trousers and a white shirt, with a cap pulled low over his dark eyes. Nothing about his appearance was remarkable, except perhaps for the slight bulge in his right pocket. With all 8 children finally gathered, Thomas stood up and brushed off his trousers. "What shall we do today?" he asked, though they all knew this was merely a formality. Their summer days followed a comfortable pattern of games and explorations, with occasional variations depending on their moods. "Let's go to the creek," suggested Joseph Wilson. "It's too hot to stay here." The suggestion met with general approval, and the group set off through Whitaker Woods toward Millbrook Creek. They walked in a loose formation, breaking naturally into smaller conversations. Thomas led the way with Lillian and Eleanor, discussing the upcoming town festival. The Wilson twins followed, still arguing over the marbles. Sarah skipped alongside Bobby, trying to guess what was in his wooden box. Peter walked quietly, occasionally looking up from his book to avoid tripping over roots and stones. Michael walked alone, slightly apart from the others, one hand perpetually in his right pocket. The woods were alive with summer sounds, birds calling, leaves rustling, the distant trickle of the creek growing louder as they approached. Shafts of sunlight broke through the canopy, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor. It was a perfect summer day, the kind that feels endless when you're young. As they neared the creek, Sarah broke away from the group, racing ahead with a whoop of excitement. "Last one, there's a rotten egg," she called over her shoulder. The challenge spurred the others into action. Joseph Wilson immediately sprinted after her, followed closely by his brother. Thomas, not to be outdone, joined the race with Eleanor, surprisingly picking up her skirts to run as well. Lillian hesitated only a moment before following, and Bobby charged ahead with a bellowing laugh. Only Peter and Michael remained walking at a normal pace. Peter because he was still engrossed in his book, and Michael because, well, no one quite knew why Michael did anything the way he did. "Aren't you going to run?" Peter asked, glancing up at Michael. Michael shook his head, his hand still in his pocket. "No need to rush," he said. "The creek isn't going anywhere." By the time they reached the creek, the others had already claimed spots along the bank. Sarah had removed her shoes and stockings and was wading in the shallow water. The Wilson twins were searching for perfect skipping stones. Thomas sat on a large rock that jutted into the water, while Lillian and Eleanor found a fallen log to serve as a bench. Bobby was crouched by the water's edge, his mysterious box now open beside him as he examined something in the creek. "What have you got there, Bobby?" Thomas called, noticing the box. Bobby looked up with a grin. "A salamander trap," he announced proudly. "My cousin from Boston showed me how to make it. Thought we might catch a few today." The prospect of catching salamanders drew immediate interest. The children gathered around as Bobby explained his contraption, a simple box with a hinged door that would close when a salamander crawled inside to investigate the bait. "What do salamanders eat?" asked Eleanor, wrinkling her nose slightly. "Worms, insects, that sort of thing," Bobby replied. "I've got some worms in this tin." He produced a small container from his pocket. As the children discussed salamander catching strategies, Michael stood slightly apart, watching. His right hand remained in his pocket, fingers wrapped around something the others couldn't see. "Michael, don't you want to help catch salamanders?" Lillian asked, noticing his distance. Michael shrugged. "I'm fine watching," he said. "What's in your pocket?" Joseph Wilson asked bluntly, always the more direct of the twins. "You keep fiddling with something." Michael's hand tightened visibly around whatever was in his pocket. "Nothing important," he said, but something in his tone made the other children exchange glances. Before anyone could press further, Sarah let out a shriek from the creek. "I found one, a salamander." Attention immediately shifted to Sarah, who was pointing excitedly at a small dark shape moving among the stones in the water. Bobby rushed over with his trap, and soon the children were fully engaged in the hunt for salamanders, all except Michael, who remained on the bank, watching with that same slight distance, and Peter, who had settled against a tree with his book but kept glancing curiously at Michael's pocket. The morning passed pleasantly as the children caught and examined salamanders, releasing them back into the creek after careful observation. They took turns wading in the cool water, skipping stones, and exploring the immediate surroundings. When the sun reached its zenith, they gathered in the shade to eat their packed lunches. As they ate, the conversation turned to the town's upcoming Independence Day celebration. It was to be a grand affair this year, with Mayor Whitaker promising fireworks ordered specially from New York City. "Father says they'll be visible from every house in Millbrook," Thomas said proudly. "And there's to be a brass band from Coopersville." "My father's shop has been busier than ever," Sarah added. "Everyone wants new ribbons and fabrics for the celebration." "The parsonage will host the luncheon after the morning service," Lillian said. "Mother's been planning the menu for weeks." As the children discussed the upcoming festivities, Bobby suddenly pointed toward the far bank of the creek. "Look there, is that a muskrat?" All eyes turned to where he was pointing. A small, dark shape moved along the opposite bank, partially obscured by reeds. "It's too big for a muskrat," James Wilson said, shading his eyes to see better. "It's a raccoon," Eleanor declared confidently. While the others debated the creature's identity, Peter noticed that Michael wasn't looking at the opposite bank at all. Instead, he was staring intently at something in his right hand, something he had finally removed from his pocket but was keeping concealed in his palm. "What's that, Michael?" Peter asked quietly, so that only Michael could hear. Michael started slightly, closing his fist around the object. "Nothing," he said quickly. But Peter had caught a glimpse of something metallic. "Is it a watch?" Peter persisted. "Or a compass?" Michael hesitated, then slowly opened his hand just enough for Peter to see. In his palm lay what appeared to be an old brass pocket watch, but unlike any watch Peter had seen before. Its face was unusually ornate, with symbols instead of numbers around the dial. The hands weren't moving, though Michael hadn't wound it. "Where did you get that?" Peter whispered, fascinated. Michael closed his hand again. "Found it," he said vaguely. "In the attic of our house. It was hidden in a box with some old papers." "Does it work?" Michael shrugged. "Not like a normal watch," he said cryptically, and returned the object to his pocket. Before Peter could ask more questions, the debate about the animal on the far bank was settled when it emerged fully from the reeds, revealing itself to be a fox. The sleek creature paused, regarding the children with alert eyes before disappearing back into the woods. "A fox in broad daylight," Thomas remarked. "That's unusual." "Maybe it's hungry," suggested Sarah. "Should we leave some of our food for it?" "Absolutely not," Eleanor said firmly. "Wild animals should not be fed. It encourages dependency." As the children debated the ethics of feeding wildlife, the day continued its lazy summer progression. After lunch, they played a game of hide-and-seek among the trees near the creek. Thomas was designated as it first, and the others scattered, while he counted to 50 with his eyes closed. The woods offered abundant hiding places, behind broad tree trunks, within hollow logs, under the drooping branches of willows that trailed in the creek. Sarah, small and nimble, found a spot in the hollow of an old sycamore. The Wilson twins, abandoning their usual togetherness, split up to hide separately. Eleanor concealed herself behind a large boulder, careful to keep her dress from touching the dirt. Lillian climbed partway up a sturdy oak, hiding among its leafy branches. Bobby crouched behind a fallen log, and Peter found a dense thicket of bushes. Michael simply walked a short distance away and stood behind a tree, making little effort to truly hide. "Ready or not, here I come," Thomas called when he finished counting. He began methodically searching the area, finding Eleanor first due to the white trim of her dress, visible against the dark stone of the boulder. Eleanor accepted being found with dignity and joined Thomas in seeking the others. Together they found Bobby, whose barely suppressed laughter gave away his position, and then Lillian, when a small branch broke under her weight with a telltale snap. Finding the Wilson twins proved more challenging. James had wedged himself into a narrow space between two rocks, while Joseph had covered himself with leaves in a shallow depression in the ground. Sarah remained undiscovered in her tree hollow, and Peter stayed perfectly still in his thicket. Michael was found easily, having made no real attempt to hide properly. "You're not very good at this game, are you?" Thomas remarked as Michael emerged from behind his tree. Michael shrugged. "I don't mind being found," he said. As the search for the remaining hidden children continued, Michael's hand returned to his right pocket. Peter, watching from his hiding place, saw Michael extract the strange watch-like object again. This time, Michael did something odd. He turned the outer ring of the watch face, aligning one of the strange symbols with what would be the 12 o'clock position on a normal watch. The moment he did so, a peculiar stillness fell over the woods. The bird song, which had been a constant background to their play, suddenly ceased. The rustling leaves went silent, though Peter could still see them moving in the breeze. Even the bubbling sound of the creek seemed to fade. It lasted only a moment before sound rushed back, but in that brief silence, Peter felt a chill despite the summer heat. He wasn't the only one who noticed. Thomas and Eleanor, who had been calling for the others, stopped and looked around in confusion. "Did you feel that?" Thomas asked, his voice slightly hushed. "Feel what?" Eleanor replied, though her expression suggested she had indeed felt something. "Like everything stopped for a second," Thomas said, frowning. Michael quickly returned the object to his pocket, his expression unreadable. The strange moment passed, and the game continued. Eventually all the children were found except for Sarah, who had fallen asleep in her tree hollow and didn't hear the calls of the others. They found her only when they were about to give up, and she woke with a start at the sound of Bobby's voice nearby, causing her to bump her head on the inside of the hollow with a yelp. "That's not fair," Joseph Wilson complained when they discovered Sarah had been asleep. "You can't sleep during hide and seek. There's no rule against it," Sarah countered, rubbing her head where she'd bumped it. As the afternoon progressed, the children's play evolved from one activity to another with the fluid spontaneity of youth. They built a small dam in a narrow part of the creek, creating a pool deep enough to float leaf boats. They played a game of tag that spread throughout the woods, their laughter echoing among the trees. Bobby taught them a new clapping game he'd learned from his cousin, with complicated rhythms and tongue-twisting verses. Throughout it all, Michael participated with that same slight reserve, his right hand frequently returning to his pocket to touch the mysterious object within. Occasionally, Peter would catch Michael adjusting the object when he thought no one was looking, and each time there would be a brief, almost imperceptible shift in the atmosphere, a moment when the world seemed to hold its breath. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber, Thomas suggested they start heading back toward town. "We should go to Harper's Hill first," Sarah proposed. "We can see the whole town from there, and Mr. Harper said his cherry trees are bearing fruit now." The suggestion was met with enthusiasm, and the group set off toward Harper's Hill, which rose at the western edge of the woods. The walk took them through a meadow filled with wildflowers, where butterflies danced on the warm air currents. Sarah and Lillian gathered small bouquets as they walked, while the Wilson twins chased grasshoppers that sprang from the tall grass. Harper's Hill wasn't truly a hill by any geographical standard, more a gentle rise in the otherwise flat landscape surrounding Millbrook, but to the children it offered a commanding view that justified its name. From its summit, they could see the whole of their small town spread before them, the white steeple of the church rising above the trees, the neat grid of streets, the ribbon of the creek winding its way toward the river beyond. At the crest of the hill stood a small orchard of cherry trees, lovingly tended by old Mr. Harper, who allowed the town's children to help themselves to the fruit, provided they didn't damage his trees. The cherries were just reaching perfect ripeness, their deep red skins glossy in the late afternoon light. "Last one to the top is a rotten egg," Bobby called, breaking into a run up the slope. The children raced upward, all except Michael, who maintained his unhurried pace, and Peter, who stayed back to walk alongside him. "That thing in your pocket," Peter said quietly. "It does something strange, doesn't it?" Michael glanced at him sharply. "What do you mean?" "When you adjust it, everything feels different for a moment, like the world stops." Michael was silent for several steps, then said, "You weren't supposed to notice." "But I did," Peter persisted. "What is it?" Michael hesitated, then slowly drew the object from his pocket. In the slanting golden light of late afternoon, its brass surface gleamed warmly. "My grandfather called it a moment catcher," he said softly. "He said it was very old, from a place far away." Peter examined it carefully. Now that he could see it properly, he realized it wasn't a watch at all, though it shared the circular shape and approximate size. The face was divided not into hours but into 12 sections, each marked with a symbol Peter didn't recognize. The 3 hands were of different metals, one gold, one silver, one what appeared to be copper, and they moved in subtle, almost imperceptible increments that seemed unrelated to the passage of time as measured by conventional clocks. "What does it do?" Peter asked, fascinated. Michael turned the outer ring slightly, aligning a different symbol with the top position. "It catches moments," he said simply. "Holds them. Sometimes it lets you go back to them." Peter looked up from the strange device to Michael's face, trying to determine if he was being teased, but Michael's expression was entirely serious. "You mean like going back in time?" Peter asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. Michael shook his head. "Not exactly. More like holding a moment so it doesn't slip away, or revisiting a moment that's already passed, but only small moments, and only ones I've been part of." Before Peter could ask more questions, they reached the top of the hill, where the others were already helping themselves to cherries. The conversation was necessarily suspended as they joined the group. The cherry trees were laden with fruit, their branches bowing under the weight. Mr. Harper had placed a wooden ladder against one of the larger trees for easier access to the higher branches, though he had strict rules about its use. Only the older children were permitted on it, and no more than one at a time. Thomas, as the eldest, claimed the first turn on the ladder, climbing carefully to reach the particularly fine cherries at the top of the tree. The others gathered what they could from the lower branches or picked from the smaller trees nearby. "These are the sweetest cherries in all of New York State," Bobby declared, juice staining his fingers and chin as he devoured a handful. "That's because Mr. Harper talks to his trees," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "My mother says he reads poetry to them every evening." "Trees can't hear," James Wilson said skeptically. "How do you know?" his twin countered. "Just because they don't have ears doesn't mean they can't hear somehow." This sparked a lively debate about whether plants could perceive the world around them, with opinions divided and each child defending their position with the absolute certainty that only comes with youth. As the discussion continued, Michael stood slightly apart, eating cherries one by one and occasionally touching the object in his right pocket. Peter noticed that Michael seemed to be watching something beyond the cherry orchard, his gaze fixed on a point in the distance. Following Michael's line of sight, Peter saw nothing unusual, just the familiar landscape of Millbrook, bathed in the golden light of approaching sunset. Yet Michael continued to stare, his expression one of curious concentration. "What are you looking at?" Peter finally asked. Michael didn't answer immediately. When he did speak, his voice was oddly distant. "Sometimes I see things that aren't there yet," he said, "or things that used to be there but aren't anymore." Before Peter could inquire further about this puzzling statement, a commotion erupted among the cherry trees. The ladder Thomas had been using had shifted suddenly, tilting precariously to one side. Thomas clung to a branch, his feet scrambling for purchase as the ladder continued to slide. "Thomas!" Eleanor cried out in alarm. The children rushed toward the tilting ladder, but they were too far away to reach it in time. Peter watched in horror as the ladder slipped further, Thomas's grip on the branch beginning to fail. Beside him, Michael moved with unexpected swiftness. His hand plunged into his right pocket, extracting the brass device. With practiced precision, he adjusted the outer ring, aligning one specific symbol with the top position, then pressed something on the side of the device. The world stuttered. There was no other word for it. Everything seemed to jolt backward for a split second, like a photograph being pushed back into perfect alignment after being knocked askew. And suddenly Thomas was standing safely on the ladder, which was perfectly stable against the tree. He was reaching for a cluster of cherries, showing no awareness of the danger that had, or would have, befallen him moments ago. Peter stared at Michael in astonishment. "Did you?" he began, but Michael silenced him with a quick shake of the head. "The ladder's not secure," Michael called out to Thomas. "You should come down." Thomas looked down at the ladder, frowning. "It seems fine to me," he replied. "Trust me," Michael insisted, his voice carrying an unusual authority. "The ground beneath it isn't level. It could slip." Something in Michael's tone convinced Thomas, who carefully descended the ladder. The moment his feet touched the ground, Michael visibly relaxed. "How did you know?" Thomas asked, examining the ladder and noticing for the first time that one leg was indeed resting on an uneven patch of soil. Michael shrugged. "Just noticed it didn't look right," he said casually, though his hand remained tightly wrapped around the object in his pocket. As the sun dipped lower toward the horizon, the children finished their cherry feast and began the walk back toward town. They took a different path from the one they had followed to the creek earlier. this one leading past the old Millbrook Cemetery on the outskirts of town. The cemetery dated back to the town's founding in the late 1700s, its oldest graves bearing names that had since been immortalized in street names and public buildings. A wrought iron fence surrounded the grounds, its pointed finials catching the last rays of sunlight like tiny spearheads. "Race you to the gate," Joseph Wilson challenged his brother, always eager for competition. "You shouldn't run in a cemetery," Lillian admonished. "It's disrespectful to those at rest." "They won't mind," Joseph retorted. "They're dead." "Joseph Wilson?" Eleanor exclaimed, scandalized. "What a horrible thing to say." "It's true, though," Bobby said pragmatically. "Can't offend someone who can't hear you." This philosophical question, whether the dead could be offended by the behavior of the living, occupied the children as they walked alongside the cemetery fence. Some, like Eleanor and Lillian, maintained that respect should be shown regardless of whether the deceased were aware. Others, like the Wilson twins and Bobby, argued that practicality suggested otherwise. As they debated, Michael lagged behind again, his attention caught by something within the cemetery. Peter, now keenly attuned to Michael's behavior, noticed his distraction and doubled back to join him. "What is it?" Peter asked, following Michael's gaze. Michael was staring at a weathered headstone some distance inside the cemetery grounds. From where they stood, Peter could just make out the name. "Hargrove, my grandfather," Michael said quietly. "He died last winter." Peter nodded solemnly. He remembered the funeral, though he hadn't attended. The whole town had known Old Man Hargrove, a retired railroad engineer with wild white hair and stories that seemed too fantastic to be true. "He gave you that thing in your pocket, didn't he?" Peter guessed. Michael nodded. "Just before he died. Said it had been in the family for generations. Said I'd know what to do with it when the time came." He paused, then added, "I think he could see things too, like I can sometimes." "What kind of things?" Peter asked, intrigued despite a growing uneasiness. Michael's hand closed around the object in his pocket. "Things that might happen," he said softly. "Or things that did happen, but no one remembers." The conversation was interrupted as Thomas called back to them. "Hurry up, you two. We need to get back before dark." The children continued their journey toward town, the houses and shops of Millbrook now visible ahead. Gas lamps were being lit along Main Street, their warm glow pushing back against the gathering dusk. A few motor cars were parked outside the Grand Hotel, where visitors from neighboring towns sometimes stayed when passing through. As they approached the town proper, they passed Dr. Blackwood's house, where Eleanor lived. The imposing Victorian structure stood slightly apart from its neighbors, surrounded by a carefully tended garden. "I should go in," Eleanor said, smoothing her skirts and adjusting her bonnet. "Mother will be expecting me for dinner." The group bid Eleanor goodbye as she walked up the stone path to her front door. One by one, the children peeled off toward their respective homes as they continued through town. Sarah turned down Merchant Street, where her father's shop stood with their living quarters above. The Wilson twins departed at Church Street, racing each other the last 100 yards to their house. Lillian left them at the parsonage beside the church, waving goodbye as she disappeared through the white gate. Soon only Thomas, Bobby, Peter, and Michael remained, walking in comfortable silence as twilight deepened around them. When they reached the public library, Peter reluctantly said his goodbyes. "See you tomorrow?" Thomas asked as Peter turned toward the library's side entrance, which led to the apartment where he lived with his father. "Yes, same time at the oak tree," Peter confirmed, his eyes flickering briefly to Michael, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Bobby's home was next, the blacksmith shop recognizable by the lingering smell of coal and hot metal, even hours after the forge had been extinguished. Bobby departed with a cheerful wave, already anticipating his mother's cooking after a day of adventure. Thomas and Michael continued alone for another block before reaching the mayor's residence, an elegant two-story house with a wraparound porch. "Will you be all right walking home alone?" Thomas asked Michael, ever conscious of his role as the eldest. Michael nodded. "It's not far," he said. His house, more modest than Thomas's but still respectable, stood at the edge of town near the woods. "See you tomorrow then," Thomas said, turning up his walkway. Michael continued alone through the deepening twilight. The streets were mostly empty now, families gathered around dinner tables or settling in for the evening. A few men still lingered outside Bennett's Tavern, their laughter occasionally breaking the stillness. As Michael walked, his hand remained in his right pocket, fingers wrapped around the brass device. He moved with purpose, not toward his home, but back toward the edge of town where they had entered from Whitaker Woods. The old oak tree stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, its massive trunk and spreading branches forming a shape both familiar and somehow ominous in the half-light. Michael approached it slowly, almost reverently, and placed his free hand against the rough bark. With his other hand, he withdrew the device from his pocket. In the fading light, the symbols on its face seemed to shift and move, no longer static engravings but living things with purpose and meaning. Michael carefully turned the outer ring, aligning a specific symbol, one that resembled a crescent moon with a star, with the top position. Then he adjusted the three hands, moving each with deliberate precision until they formed a pattern that made sense only to him. When the configuration was complete, he pressed the device against the tree trunk and whispered words in a language that had not been spoken in Millbrook for generations, perhaps had never been spoken there at all, except by old man Hargrove and now his grandson. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, a change came over the oak tree. A soft glow emanated from within the bark, spreading until the entire trunk was illuminated from within, revealing patterns in the wood that resembled the symbols on Michael's device. The glow intensified, concentrated in a vertical line that gradually widened until it formed what appeared to be a doorway of light within the massive trunk. Through this doorway, vague shapes moved, figures that were not quite substantial enough to be called people, yet too deliberate in their movements to be mere shadows. Michael stood before this impossible doorway, the brass device held tightly in his right hand, his expression a mixture of wonder and apprehension. He had discovered what the device could do months ago, shortly after his grandfather's death, but he had never dared to open the doorway so completely before. What would happen if he stepped through? His grandfather's instructions had been frustratingly vague, filled with warnings about maintaining the balance and the responsibility of the timekeeper. Michael understood only that the device, the timekeeper's key, his grandfather had called it, was important beyond measure, and that it had been entrusted to him for a reason. As he stood contemplating the doorway, a voice called out behind him, "Michael." He turned, quickly hiding the device in his pocket, though it was too late to conceal the glowing doorway in the oak. Peter stood a few yards away, his book clutched to his chest, eyes wide with astonishment. "What is that?" Peter asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The doorway began to fade the moment Michael had put the device away, the glow receding back into the bark until the oak was just an ordinary tree once more. "You followed me," Michael said. It wasn't a question. Peter nodded. "I saw you go past the library. You weren't heading home." He hesitated, then added, "I was curious about the thing in your pocket." Michael regarded Peter thoughtfully. His grandfather had told him that someday he would need to choose a witness, someone to share the secret of the timekeeper's key, someone who would understand its importance and help protect it. Perhaps Peter, with his quiet intelligence and keen observation, was meant to be that person. "It's called the timekeeper's key," Michael said finally. "It doesn't just catch moments like I told you earlier. It can open doors to other times, other places." Peter took a step closer, his initial fear giving way to fascination. "Is that what that light was? A door to another time?" Michael nodded. "I think so. I'm still learning how it works. My grandfather didn't tell me everything before he trailed off, then continued more firmly. There are rules, things I'm not supposed to do. Changing big events is forbidden. Only small adjustments are allowed, like with Thomas and the ladder today." "But why?" Peter asked. "Why do you have it? Why you?" Michael sighed, a sound too weary for a 10-year-old boy. "It's been in my family for generations. There's always one Hargrove who becomes the timekeeper. My grandfather was the last one. Now it's me." He paused, then added, "There are others out there with different keys. Doorkeepers, pathfinders, truth-sayers. My grandfather talked about them sometimes, but I've never met any." Peter digested this information, his scholarly mind already connecting it to tales he'd read of secret societies and ancient orders. "So you're part of some kind of organization?" "I don't know if it's that formal," Michael said. "More like people with responsibilities that most people don't know about." He hesitated, then made a decision. "I can show you how it works." "Not everything. I'm still learning myself. But some things." Peter nodded eagerly, all thoughts of dinner and his waiting father forgotten. "Yes, please." Michael withdrew the timekeeper's key from his pocket once more. In the deepening twilight, its brass surface seemed to absorb what little light remained, giving it a warm glow. "There are different configurations," Michael explained, indicating the symbols around the edge. Different combinations of symbols and hand positions do different things. He aligned one symbol, what looked to Peter like a stylized hourglass, with the top position, then carefully arranged the 3 metal hands. "This is for viewing the past," Michael said, not changing anything, just looking. He held the key out flat on his palm and whispered a word. Immediately, the air above the key shimmered, and an image formed, the same spot where they stood, but in bright daylight. In the image, they could see themselves and the other children gathering at the oak tree that very morning. Peter gasped, "It's us! From today!" Michael nodded, whispering another word that caused the image to fade. "I can go back further," he said. "Watch." He adjusted the key again, the hands moving to new positions, and whispered a different word. The air shimmered once more, and this time they saw the oak tree in winter, snow covering the ground, the branches bare. A horse-drawn sleigh passed by, carrying a family bundled in heavy coats and blankets. "That's the Millers," Peter whispered, recognizing Sarah's parents and an infant who must have been Sarah herself. "But that must be years ago." "About 9 years," Michael confirmed. "The winter Sarah was born." The images continued, Michael adjusting the key to show them glimpses of Millbrook's past. The oak tree as a sapling, the first buildings of the town being constructed, Native Americans passing through the virgin forest before European settlement. "It's incredible," Peter breathed, watching history unfold before his eyes. Michael closed his hand around the key and the images vanished. "There's more it can do," he said, "but some things are dangerous. My grandfather warned me about looking too far forward or changing too much of the past." "Can you see the future?" Peter asked eagerly. Michael hesitated. "Sometimes. Glimpses. But it's not clear like the past. More like possibilities." He adjusted the key once more, this time aligning a different symbol, one that resembled a branching tree, with the top position. The hands he arranged in a triangular pattern, each pointing to a different section of the face. When he whispered the activation word, the air shimmered not with a single image, but with multiple overlapping scenes, each slightly transparent and moving at different speeds. In one, they could see Millbrook much as it was now. In another, the town was larger, with strange horseless carriages unlike any they had seen before. In a third, the town was gone entirely. The land returned to forest. "These are possible futures," Michael explained, his voice strained with the effort of maintaining the complex vision. The further ahead, the less certain. Peter tried to focus on the images, but they shifted too quickly, each one bleeding into the others until they formed a confusing kaleidoscope of possibilities. One image, however, seemed to repeat across multiple futures, a scene of the 8 children standing together, but with something wrong, something missing. "What's that one?" Peter asked, pointing to the recurring image. "The one with all of us." Michael frowned, focusing on the image Peter indicated. As it stabilized, they could see all 8 children standing in a formal group, as if for a photograph. Their expressions were solemn, and they wore clothing suitable for a formal occasion. "I don't know," Michael said, studying the image. "It feels important somehow, but also wrong." As they watched, the image suddenly changed. One of the children, Michael himself, vanished from the group, leaving only 7. Then another disappeared, then another, until only Thomas remained, standing alone with an expression of profound loss. Michael gasped and closed his hand around the key, cutting off the vision. "Something's going to happen," he said, his voice shaking. "Something bad. To us? To the group?" Peter asked, alarmed. Michael shook his head. "I don't know. The future isn't fixed. That's what my grandfather always said. It's full of possibilities until choices make it certain." He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "But something's coming, something that threatens us." Before Peter could respond, a distant voice called his name. His father, likely wondering where he had gone when he should have been home for dinner. "I have to go," Peter said reluctantly. "But we'll talk more tomorrow." Michael nodded, slipping the key back into his right pocket. "Don't tell the others yet," he cautioned. "Not until I understand more about what we saw," Peter agreed, though the weight of their shared secret already felt heavy on his young shoulders. As he turned to go, a thought struck him. "Michael," he said, "if your grandfather had that key, and he could see possible futures, do you think he knew when he was going to die?" Michael's expression grew distant. "Yes," he said simply. "He knew. He told me once that timekeepers always know when their time is ending. It's part of the burden of the key." With that sobering thought, they parted ways. Peter hurrying home to his waiting father while Michael turned toward his own house, the timekeeper's key a reassuring weight in his right pocket. The next morning dawned clear and bright, another perfect summer day in Millbrook. The children gathered as planned at the old oak tree, arriving one by one until all 8 were present. To casual observation, everything was as it had been the day before. The same children, the same meeting place, the same summer freedom stretching before them. But there were subtle differences. Michael seemed more alert, his customary reserve replaced by watchful attention. Peter kept glancing at Michael's right pocket, where the timekeeper's key rested, and between these two boys existed a new understanding, a shared secret that set them slightly apart from the others. "What shall we do today?" Thomas asked, just as he had the day before. Various suggestions were offered. Return to the creek, explore the caves beyond Harper's Hill, visit Widow Jenkins, who always had fresh-baked cookies for children who helped weed her garden. As the discussion continued, Sarah suddenly pointed to the road that led into town. "Look, it's Mr. Sullivan's new motor car." All heads turned to see a gleaming black automobile approaching slowly, its engine puttering and coughing. Behind the wheel sat Mr. Sullivan, the bank manager, wearing driving goggles and a determined expression as he navigated the unfamiliar machine. "Let's go see it," Bobby suggested excitedly, and without waiting for agreement, he dashed toward the road. The others followed quickly, eager to examine the motorcar up close. Mr. Sullivan, seeing the children's interest, obligingly stopped the vehicle. "Good morning, children," he called, raising his goggles to his forehead. "Would you like to have a look at the latest in modern transportation?" The children gathered around the motor car, exclaiming over its polished exterior and complicated controls. Mr. Sullivan, clearly proud of his purchase, explained the basics of its operation. "It's a 1908 Ford Model T," he told them. "Just arrived from Detroit last week, 15 horsepower, and can reach speeds of 45 miles per hour, though I haven't dared try that yet." "Can we ride in it, Mr. Sullivan?" Sarah asked hopefully. Mr. Sullivan chuckled. "Not today, I'm afraid. I'm still learning to drive it properly myself, perhaps when I'm more confident." He checked his pocket watch. "I must be getting to the bank. Good day to you all." As Mr. Sullivan prepared to continue his journey, Michael suddenly stepped forward. "Sir," he said urgently, "you should check the brake before you go. I think there might be something wrong with it." Mr. Sullivan looked surprised. "The brake? It seemed fine when I left home." "Please check it," Michael insisted, his hand in his right pocket. Something in the boy's tone gave Mr. Sullivan pause. He set the handbrake and climbed out of the motor car, kneeling to examine the brake mechanism. After a moment of inspection, his expression changed to one of concern. "Well, I'll be," he said, reaching beneath the vehicle. "There's a loose pin here that could have caused the brake to fail entirely." He looked up at Michael with newfound respect. "How did you know, young man?" Michael shrugged uncomfortably under the sudden attention. "Just had a feeling," he said. Mr. Sullivan spent several minutes repairing the brake with a tool from the motorcar's compartment, then thanked Michael again before continuing on his way to town. As the children watched the motorcar disappear around a bend in the road, Thomas turned to Michael with a puzzled expression. "How did you really know about that brake?" he asked. "You didn't even look at it closely." Michael avoided meeting Thomas's eyes. "Just noticed something didn't look right," he said, the same explanation he had given about the ladder the day before. Thomas frowned, clearly not entirely satisfied with the answer, but before he could press further, Lillian suggested they head to Widow Jenkins's house to see about those cookies. The group set off toward town, Michael and Peter bringing up the rear as they had the previous day. Once they were out of earshot of the others, Peter whispered, "You saw it in one of those future visions, didn't you? Something was going to happen to Mr. Sullivan." Michael nodded grimly. "An accident. A bad one. I saw it last night after you left. I tried different configurations with the key until I found what was wrong." "So you changed the future?" Peter said, a hint of awe in his voice. "A small change," Michael clarified. "That's allowed. Fixing a brake isn't changing the course of history, but there are limits to what I can or should change." He hesitated, then added, "The thing is, every change has consequences. Save someone from one accident and they might meet a different fate elsewhere. The key shows possibilities, not certainties." This sobering thought accompanied them as they rejoined the others, who were debating the relative merits of Widow Jenkins's different cookie recipes. The consensus seemed to be that her molasses cookies were superior to her sugar cookies, though both were excellent when accompanied by cold milk. Widow Jenkins lived in a small cottage on Orchard Street, its exterior humble, but its garden immaculate. Flowers bloomed in carefully tended beds, and fruit trees, apple, pear, and cherry, stood in precise rows behind the house. The widow herself was working in her front garden when the children arrived, her gray hair tucked beneath a sunbonnet, her hands protected by gardening gloves. "Well, good morning, children," she called cheerfully when she spotted them. "What brings you to my door today? We thought you might need help with your garden, Mrs. Jenkins," Thomas said politely, though the children's glances toward the house made their true motivation transparent. Widow Jenkins laughed, seeing through the pretense immediately. "How thoughtful of you. As it happens, I do need some weeding done in the vegetable patch out back, and I believe I baked too many molasses cookies yesterday. They're just going to waste sitting on my kitchen counter." The exchange of labor for cookies was quickly arranged, and soon the children were at work in the vegetable garden, pulling weeds from around tomato plants, bean vines, and rows of carrots and radishes. The work was not difficult, and with 8 pairs of hands, it progressed rapidly. As they worked, the conversation drifted to the upcoming Independence Day celebration, now just 3 days away. Mayor Whitaker had promised this year's festivities would be the grandest Millbrook had ever seen, with fireworks, a parade, and various competitions with prizes for the winners. "There's to be a sack race," Thomas informed them, having privileged information as the mayor's son, "and a pie-eating contest. I'll win the pie-eating for certain," Bobby declared, patting his stomach. "I've been practicing my whole life. They're having a spelling competition too," Lillian said. "Father told me, with a dictionary as the prize." "Peter will win that," Sarah said confidently. "He reads more than anyone." Peter smiled at the vote of confidence but said nothing, his mind still occupied with the revelations of the previous evening and Michael's intervention with Mr. Sullivan's motor car that morning. Michael worked quietly, as was his habit, though Peter noticed he seemed distracted, his eyes frequently scanning their surroundings as if looking for something out of place. Occasionally, his right hand would slip into his pocket, checking that the timekeeper's key was still secure. After an hour of weeding, the vegetable garden was transformed, with neat rows of plants now clearly visible where weeds had previously threatened to overwhelm them. Widow Jenkins, inspecting their work, nodded approvingly. "Excellent job, children. Those vegetables will grow twice as well now without competition from those weeds." She smiled warmly. "I believe I promised you cookies for your efforts." The children followed her into the cottage, where the promised molasses cookies waited on a large platter on the kitchen table. Glasses were filled with cold milk from a pitcher, and soon the children were enjoying their well-earned rewards. As they ate, Widow Jenkins inquired about their summer activities and plans for the Independence Day celebration. The conversation was pleasant and unremarkable until she addressed Michael directly. "And how is your mother, Michael? I heard she hasn't been well." Michael looked up from his cookie, surprised at being singled out. "She's better, thank you, Mrs. Jenkins. The doctor says she'll be fully recovered soon." Widow Jenkins nodded, but her eyes lingered on Michael with an expression that Peter couldn't quite interpret, something between concern and recognition. "You're very like your grandfather, you know," she said softly. He had the same watchful eyes. Michael tensed slightly, his right hand moving instinctively toward his pocket before he caught himself. "Thank you," he said simply. "I miss him." "As do we all," Widow Jenkins replied. "Herbert Hargrove was a good man, a man who understood the weight of responsibility." Something in the way she emphasized the last word caused Peter to look between her and Michael with sudden suspicion. Did Widow Jenkins know about the timekeeper's key? Before he could ponder this further, the moment passed, and Widow Jenkins was offering second cookies to anyone who wanted them. The conversation returned to lighter topics, but Peter noticed that Michael remained quiet and watchful for the remainder of their visit. When they had finished their cookies and milk and thanked Widow Jenkins properly, the children left the cottage and continued their day's adventures. They visited the town square, where preparations for the Independence Day celebration were already underway. Men were constructing a bandstand in the center of the square, while others hung red, white, and blue bunting from lampposts and buildings. "It's going to be magnificent," Eleanor said, watching the activity with approval. "Father says people from all the neighboring towns will be coming to see the fireworks." As they wandered through the square, Michael suddenly stopped, his attention caught by something or someone across the open space. Following his gaze, Peter saw a tall, thin man in a dark suit, standing perfectly still amid the bustle of activity. The man was watching them, or more specifically, watching Michael, with an intensity that seemed inappropriate for observing a group of children. When the man realized he had been noticed, he tipped his hat slightly in Michael's direction, a gesture that seemed more threatening than polite despite its formality. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of workers. "Who was that?" Peter asked quietly. Michael's face had gone pale. "I don't know," he said, "but he was looking at my pocket, at where the key is." Peter felt a chill despite the summer heat. "Could he be one of those others you mentioned? The doorkeepers or whatever?" Michael shook his head slowly. "Maybe. Or something else. My grandfather warned me that there are people who want the keys for themselves, people who would use them for selfish purposes." The encounter cast a shadow over the remainder of their morning. Michael seemed increasingly tense, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, his hand rarely leaving his right pocket. The other children, unaware of the source of his unease, nevertheless picked up on his mood. "What's wrong with Michael today?" Sarah asked Peter as they walked toward the creek for an afternoon swim. "He keeps looking around like he expects someone to jump out at him." Peter, bound by his promise not to reveal Michael's secret, merely shrugged. "Maybe he's not feeling well," he suggested. The creek provided a welcome respite from the heat of the day. The children removed shoes and stockings, and the boys rolled up their trouser legs to wade in the cool water. Eleanor and Lillian, more mindful of propriety, sat on the bank with their feet dangling in the shallows. As they played and splashed, Michael gradually seemed to relax, his earlier tension fading in the simple joy of childhood pleasures. He even joined in when Bobby suggested a game of water tag, surprising the others with his enthusiastic participation. Yet Peter noticed that Michael never removed his hand from his right pocket when others came close to him, guarding the timekeeper's key with unconscious vigilance. As the afternoon progressed, clouds began to gather on the western horizon, promising an evening thunderstorm. Thomas, ever responsible, suggested they start heading back to town before the rain began. Their path took them once more past the old Millbrook Cemetery. As they walked alongside the wrought iron fence, Michael suddenly stopped, his attention caught by something within the cemetery grounds. "Michael?" Thomas called, noticing he had fallen behind. "Are you coming?" But Michael didn't respond. He was staring at a fresh grave near the back of the cemetery, one that Peter was certain hadn't been there the day before. A chill ran down Peter's spine as he realized what Michael must be seeing. Not a current reality, but a possible future. Peter hurried back to Michael's side while the others continued ahead, unaware of what was happening. "What do you see?" he whispered urgently. Michael's face was pale, his eyes fixed on something only he could perceive. "A new grave," he said, his voice barely audible. With one of our names on it." Peter felt his blood run cold. "Whose?" he asked, though part of him didn't want to know. Michael shook his head, blinking rapidly as if to clear his vision. "I couldn't see clearly. The image wasn't strong enough." He looked at Peter with troubled eyes. "But something's coming. Something bad. Soon." The distant rumble of thunder punctuated his words, and fat raindrops began to fall, scattered at first, but quickly increasing in intensity. The children broke into a run, heading for the shelter of town, their earlier lightheartedness replaced by the simple desire to get out of the sudden downpour. They reached Main Street as the rain became a torrent, water streaming down the gutters and forming puddles in the uneven street. The group split up quickly, each child dashing toward home with hasty goodbyes. Peter and Michael, both heading in the same general direction, ran side by side through the deluge. When they reached the library, Peter hesitated. "Come inside until the rain stops," he urged Michael, who would still have several blocks to go to reach his own home. Michael nodded gratefully, and they ducked through the side entrance that led to the apartment Peter shared with his father. The library itself was closed, it being a Sunday, but the living quarters were warm and dry. Peter's father, Mr. Crawford, looked up in surprise as the two dripping boys entered. He was seated in his favorite armchair by the window, a book open on his lap and a cup of tea on the small table beside him. "Peter, and Michael Hargrove, isn't it?" he said, setting his book aside. "You boys are soaked through. Let me get you some towels." As Mr. Crawford went to fetch towels, Peter and Michael stood awkwardly in the small sitting room, conscious of the puddles forming beneath them on the polished wooden floor. The apartment, though modest, was filled with books, not just the expected professional collection of a librarian, but volumes on every conceivable subject, many clearly antique and valuable. Michael's eyes were drawn to a particular shelf where several ancient-looking tomes were displayed behind glass. "Your father has quite a collection," he observed quietly. Peter nodded. He specializes in rare books. Some of those are hundreds of years old. Mr. Crawford returned with towels, which the boys gratefully used to dry themselves as best they could. "You're welcome to stay until the storm passes, Michael," he offered. "I was just about to make a fresh pot of tea," while Mr. Crawford busied himself in the small kitchen. Michael moved closer to the glass-fronted bookcase, examining the volumes within. One in particular seemed to capture his attention, a small leather-bound book with strange symbols embossed on its spine. "What's that one?" he asked Peter, pointing to the book. Peter looked where Michael was indicating. "I'm not sure. Father has so many books, and some of them are in languages I don't recognize." Before they could discuss it further, Mr. Crawford returned with a tray bearing a teapot, cups, and a plate of biscuits. "Here we are," he said cheerfully. "Nothing like hot tea on a rainy day." As they sat around the small table, enjoying the tea and biscuits, Mr. Crawford asked about their summer activities. The conversation was pleasant and unremarkable until Michael, with a casualness that Peter suspected was deliberate, asked about the book he had noticed. "Mr. Crawford, what's that book in your cabinet? The one with the strange symbols on the spine?" Mr. Crawford's hand paused halfway to his teacup, his expression changing subtly. He glanced at the bookcase, then at Michael, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You have a good eye, Michael," he said carefully. "That's a very old book, written in a language few people can read these days." He paused, then asked, "What made you notice that particular volume among so many?" Michael shrugged, though Peter could see tension in his shoulders. "The symbols looked interesting," he said. "They reminded me of something my grandfather had." At the mention of Michael's grandfather, Mr. Crawford's expression changed again, a flicker of something like recognition crossing his features. "Herbert Hargrove was a remarkable man," he said slowly, "a man of many interests." The way he hesitated before the word interests made Peter look between his father and Michael with growing suspicion. There was an undercurrent to this conversation that he didn't understand but could definitely sense. Michael's right hand had moved to his pocket, where the timekeeper's key rested. "Yes, he was," he agreed simply. Mr. Crawford seemed to come to a decision. He set down his teacup and rose from his chair, moving to the glass-fronted bookcase. With a small key from his waistcoat pocket, he unlocked the cabinet and carefully removed the book that had caught Michael's attention. "This," he said, returning to the table, "is a very rare volume called The Chronology of Keys. It dates back to the 16th century and documents the history and purpose of certain artifacts." He placed the book on the table between them, but did not open it. Instead, he looked directly at Michael. "Your grandfather showed great wisdom in his choice," he said cryptically. "The mantle of timekeeper is not one to be taken lightly." Peter gasped softly. His father knew about the key. Michael's expression was guarded, but he nodded slowly. "You're a keeper too?" he asked. Mr. Crawford shook his head. "No, not a keeper, a chronicler. We record the histories of the keys and their bearers." He glanced at Peter. "Each keeper eventually chooses a witness, someone to share their burden and safeguard their secret. It seems my son has been chosen for that role." Peter's mind was reeling. His father had been keeping secrets from him, secrets connected to the very mystery he had discovered with Michael. "You knew about all this?" he asked incredulously. "The keys, the timekeepers, everything?" "Yes," Mr. Crawford acknowledged. "The Crawford family has been chroniclers for generations, just as the Hargroves have been timekeepers." He looked at Michael. "But there is something you should know, something that concerns the vision you had at the cemetery today." Michael stiffened. "You know about that too?" "I suspected," Mr. Crawford said. "The signs have been there for those who know how to read them. The man in the square today, you saw him, didn't you? Tall, thin, dressed in black?" Michael nodded, his face serious. "Who is he?" "He is called the Collector," Mr. Crawford said grimly. "He seeks the keys for himself, to use their power for his own purposes. He has been searching for the timekeeper's key for many years, and somehow he has discovered that it is here, in Millbrook." The implications of this revelation hung heavy in the air. Outside, thunder rumbled and rain lashed against the windows, as if the weather itself was responding to the gravity of the conversation. "What does he want?" Peter asked, finding his voice. "What would happen if he got the key?" Mr. Crawford's expression darkened. The keys were created to maintain balance in the world, to make small adjustments where necessary, to preserve what should be preserved and allow change where change is needed. In the wrong hands, they could be used to alter reality itself. to reshape the world according to one person's desires. He turned to Michael. The vision you had at the cemetery, it was a warning. The collector will not stop until he has what he wants, and he does not care who is harmed in the process. Michael's hand closed around the key in his pocket. The grave I saw, he said quietly. It's going to be real, isn't it? Someone is going to die. Not necessarily, Mr. Crawford said firmly. The future is not fixed. That's why the timekeeper exists, to guide events along the best possible path. He opened the ancient book, turning pages carefully until he found what he was looking for. There is a configuration of the key that can be used to reveal the collector's intentions. If you know what he plans to do, you can act to prevent it. He showed Michael a page in the book, which contained an illustration of a device identical to the timekeeper's key, with specific symbols aligned and hands positioned in a particular pattern. Michael studied it intently, committing the configuration to memory. You must be careful, Mr. Crawford warned. Using the key draws attention. The collector will sense it, especially if you use it for something significant. Michael nodded gravely. I understand. The storm outside began to subside, the thunder growing more distant, the rain lessening to a gentle patter. Mr. Crawford closed the book and returned it to its place in the cabinet. You should go home now, Michael, he said. Your mother will be worried, but be vigilant. The collector is in Millbrook, and he knows what you carry. As Michael prepared to leave, Mr. Crawford placed a hand on his shoulder. Remember, the power of the key is great, but it is not without limits. Some events cannot and should not be changed. The burden of the timekeeper is knowing the difference. Michael nodded, his young face solemn with the weight of responsibility. I'll remember, he promised. Peter accompanied Michael to the door. I'll see you tomorrow at the oak tree, he asked. Yes, Michael said, but be careful. All of you should be careful. He hesitated, then added, the grave I saw. I couldn't read the name clearly, but I think it might have been one of us, one of the 8. With that troubling thought, he departed, hurrying through the damp streets toward his home, the timekeeper's key, secure in his right pocket. The following morning dawned clear and fresh, the storm having washed the world clean. When Peter arrived at the oak tree, he found Michael already there, sitting with his back against the massive trunk, the timekeeper's key in his hands. Did you try the configuration my father showed you? Peter asked without preamble. Michael nodded grimly. Last night, it showed me. He trailed off, his expression troubled. What? What did you see? The Independence Day celebration, Michael said quietly. Something's going to happen there. Something involving the collector and... He hesitated. And one of us. One of the 8. Before Peter could ask for details, they heard voices approaching. The Wilson twins arrived, arguing as usual, followed closely by Sarah and Bobby. Thomas, Eleanor, and Lillian appeared moments later, completing their group. What shall we do today? Thomas asked, just as he had the previous 2 mornings. But before anyone could suggest an activity, the conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a stranger, the tall, thin man in black whom Michael and Peter had seen in the town square the day before, the collector. He approached with a friendly smile that didn't reach his eyes, tipping his hat politely to the assembled children. Good morning, he said, his voice smooth and cultured. What a delightful group. Enjoying your summer holiday, are you? The children murmured polite greetings, though Peter noticed several of them, not just Michael, seemed instinctively wary of the stranger. Allow me to introduce myself, the man continued. Jonathan Black at your service. I'm visiting Millbrook for a few days. His eyes moved from child to child, lingering slightly longer on Michael. I'm a collector, you see, of rare and unusual items. Peter felt a chill at the man's choice of words. Michael had gone very still, his right hand in his pocket, clutching the key. What kind of items do you collect, sir? Thomas asked politely, ever the mayor's son. The man smiled again, that same smile that never reached his eyes. Oh, timepieces mainly. Watches, clocks, chronometers, especially those with unusual properties. His gaze settled on Michael. I've heard that there might be some interesting examples in Millbrook, perhaps in private collections. The implication was clear to Peter and Michael, though the others remained oblivious to the underlying threat. Mr. Black, the collector, knew about the timekeeper's key, and he knew Michael had it. I don't know of any special timepieces, Eleanor said primly. My father has a fine pocket watch from Switzerland, but I don't think it's what you'd call unusual. Indeed, Mr. Black replied, still looking at Michael. Well, perhaps I've been misinformed, though I find that unlikely. An uncomfortable silence fell, broken only when Bobby suggested they head to the creek for the day's adventures. The children agreed readily, eager to escape the strange tension created by the visitors' presence. "It was a pleasure meeting you all," Mr. Black said as they prepared to leave. "I'm sure we'll see each other again, perhaps at the Independence Day celebration. I hear it's to be quite spectacular." As the children moved away from the oak tree, heading toward Whitaker Woods and the creek beyond, Peter glanced back to see Mr. Black still standing there, watching them go. No, not them. Watching Michael specifically, his eyes fixed on the boy's right pocket. Once they were safely within the woods, out of earshot of the stranger, Sarah voiced what they had all been feeling. There was something odd about that man, she said with a child's directness. He smiled with his mouth but not with his eyes. "I didn't like the way he looked at us," Lillian agreed, as if he was trying to figure out which one of us had something he wanted. The observation was uncomfortably accurate. Peter glanced at Michael, who was walking with his head down, his right hand still in his pocket, gripping the key. "We should stay together today," Thomas declared, unconsciously assuming a protective role over the younger children. "No splitting up, even for games." The suggestion met with unanimous agreement. There was something about Mr. Black that had unsettled all of them, creating a sense of solidarity in the face of a perceived threat. They reached the creek and settled into their usual activities, though with a subdued quality that reflected their lingering unease. The Wilson twins skipped stones with less enthusiasm than usual. Sarah waded in the shallows but stayed closer to the group than she typically would. Even Bobby's jokes seemed forced, his laughter a bit hollow. Michael sat slightly apart, as was his habit, but Peter joined him, speaking in a low voice that wouldn't carry to the others. "It's him, isn't it? The collector. He knows you have the key." Michael nodded grimly. "He's been looking for it for years, according to your father. Now he's found it. Found me." He looked up at Peter, his eyes troubled. "He'll try to take it. Tomorrow, at the celebration. That's what I saw when I used the configuration your father showed me." "We have to stop him," Peter said firmly. "Tell the others, get help." Michael shook his head. "We can't tell everyone about the key. It's too dangerous. And who would believe us? A children's story about a magical timepiece and a villain trying to steal it." He sighed heavily. "No, I have to handle this myself. It's my responsibility." "Not just yours," Peter insisted. "Mine too now. I'm your witness, remember? And my father knows about it. He can help." Michael considered this, then nodded slowly. "Maybe. We'll talk to him tonight. But for now, we should act normal. The others are already suspicious." Indeed, Thomas had noticed their intense conversation and was watching them with a puzzled expression. When he caught Peter's eye, he raised an eyebrow questioningly. Peter forced a smile and shrugged, as if to say they were discussing nothing important. Thomas didn't seem entirely convinced, but turned his attention back to helping Eleanor construct a small dam of stones in the creek. The day passed with the children staying unusually close together, their play more subdued than on previous days. When the time came to return to town, they walked in a tight group, eyes alert for any sign of Mr. Black. They didn't see him again that day, but his presence, or the possibility of it, hung over them like a shadow. When they reached the point where they would normally separate to go to their respective homes, there was a moment of hesitation. "We'll all meet at the town square tomorrow morning for the celebration, right?" Thomas finally said. 10 o'clock by the bandstand. The others nodded in agreement. As they began to disperse, Michael caught Peter's eye and mouthed the words, "Your father," silently. Peter nodded in understanding. They needed to consult Mr. Crawford about the collector's appearance and the threat he posed. When Peter arrived home, he found his father already aware of the situation. "Mr. Black came to the library today," Mr. Crawford said gravely, "asking about rare books on timepieces. He knows I'm a chronicler." "What did you tell him?" Peter asked anxiously. "Nothing helpful," Mr. Crawford assured him, "but his presence here is troubling. The collector doesn't show himself unless he's confident of success." He paced the small sitting room, his expression worried. "We need to warn Michael. The key must be protected." "Michael's coming here tonight," Peter informed him. "We arranged it before we separated." Mr. Crawford nodded approvingly. "Good. We need to prepare for tomorrow. The Independence Day celebration will provide the perfect opportunity for the collector to act. Crowds, confusion, everyone's attention elsewhere." When Michael arrived an hour later, the three of them gathered around the small table in the Crawfords' sitting room. Mr. Crawford had retrieved the chronology of keys from its place in the cabinet and was turning its pages carefully. The collector's methods are well documented. he explained, indicating passages in the ancient text. He creates a diversion, isolates his target, then uses force or trickery to obtain what he seeks. He has been pursuing the keys for centuries, taking different forms, different names, but always with the same purpose, to control time itself. Centuries? Michael asked incredulously. How is that possible? He has obtained other keys, Mr. Crawford said grimly. Not the timekeeper's key, but others with their own powers. The doorkeeper's key allows passage between worlds. The Pathfinder's key reveals hidden routes and secrets. With these, he has extended his life far beyond natural limits. What happens if he gets the timekeeper's key? Peter asked, though he feared he knew the answer. Mr. Crawford's expression was grave. Control of time means control of everything. He could reshape reality to his will, alter events both past and present. The balance that the keys were created to maintain would be destroyed. Michael's hand went to his right pocket, where the key rested. I won't let him take it, he said with quiet determination. It's not just about keeping it from him, Mr. Crawford cautioned. The vision you had of the grave in the cemetery. The collector will not hesitate to harm others to achieve his goal. Someone is in danger. But who? Peter asked. Michael said he couldn't see the name clearly. Mr. Crawford turned more pages in the ancient book. There is another configuration, he said, finding what he sought. More powerful, but more dangerous to use. It can reveal specific threats to specific individuals. He showed Michael an illustration of the key with yet another arrangement of symbols and hands. This configuration looked more complex than any Michael had used before, with the hands crossing each other in an intricate pattern. Be warned, Mr. Crawford said solemnly. Using this configuration will definitely alert the collector to your presence. He will know you are actively using the key. Michael studied the illustration carefully, committing it to memory. I understand the risk, he said, but I need to know who's in danger. When Michael left the Crawfords' apartment an hour later, night had fallen over Millbrook. Gas lamps cast pools of yellow light along Main Street, but the side streets were dim, shadows gathering in doorways and alleys. Michael walked quickly, aware of the vulnerability of his position. The timekeeper's key was a reassuring weight in his right pocket, but it was also the very thing that put him in danger. His hand closed around it, drawing comfort from its solid presence. As he turned onto his street, he became aware of a figure standing beneath a tree ahead. Tall, thin, dressed in black. The collector, waiting for him. Michael's heart raced, but he forced himself to keep walking at a steady pace. Running would only confirm what the collector already suspected, that he was the current bearer of the timekeeper's key. As he drew nearer, Mr. Black stepped forward into a pool of lamplight. Good evening, young Mr. Hargrove, he said pleasantly, as if encountering a friend by chance. Rather late for a boy your age to be out alone, isn't it? I'm almost home, sir, Michael replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Just there, he pointed to his house, visible further down the street. Indeed, Mr. Black said with a thin smile. Still, these are uncertain times. One never knows what might be lurking in the shadows. He adjusted his position slightly, blocking Michael's path. I was very interested to learn that you are Herbert Hargrove's grandson. Your grandfather and I were acquainted. Were you, sir? Michael said noncommittally, his right hand tightening around the key in his pocket. Oh yes, the collector confirmed. We had a mutual interest in timepieces. His gaze dropped pointedly to Michael's right pocket. I believe he may have left you something of value, something that rightfully belongs to me. Any pretense of casual conversation was now abandoned. The collector's intent was clear, his desire for the key naked in his expression. I don't know what you mean, sir, Michael said, summoning his courage. Excuse me, but I should get home. My mother will be worried. He made to step around the man, but the collector moved with surprising speed, his hand shooting out to grasp Michael's wrist. I think you know exactly what I mean, boy, he said, his cultured voice hardening. The timekeeper's key. Give it to me now, and I'll let you go unharmed. Michael twisted in the man's grip, panic rising. Let me go, he demanded, pulling back with all his strength. To his surprise, the collector released him suddenly, causing Michael to stumble backward. When he regained his balance, he saw why. A figure was approaching from further up the street. It was Mr. Bennett, the tavern keeper, walking home after closing his establishment for the night. Everything all right there? Mr. Bennett called, noticing the confrontation. The collector's demeanor changed instantly, the threatening intensity replaced by a benign smile. Perfectly fine, thank you, he called back, just giving young Mr. Hargrove some directions. He turned back to Michael, his voice dropping to a whisper. "This isn't over, boy. I'll have the key tomorrow one way or another. And if you try to interfere, someone will pay the price." His eyes gleamed with malevolent purpose. "Perhaps one of your little friends." With that, he tipped his hat in mock politeness and walked away, passing Mr. Bennett with a cordial nod. "You all right, lad?" Mr. Bennett asked as he reached Michael. "That fellow giving you trouble?" "No, sir," Michael lied, not wanting to involve anyone else in the dangerous situation. "Just a misunderstanding." Mr. Bennett looked unconvinced, but didn't press the issue. "Well, you get on home now. It's late for a young'un to be out." Michael thanked him and hurried the rest of the way to his house, looking back frequently to ensure the collector wasn't following. Once safely inside, he went directly to his room and closed the door. Sitting on his bed, he removed the timekeeper's key from his pocket and studied it in the lamplight. The configuration Mr. Crawford had shown him, the one that would reveal specific threats, tempted him. He needed to know which of his friends was in danger, but the warning echoed in his mind. Using that configuration would alert the collector, would confirm beyond doubt that Michael possessed the key and knew how to use it. After a moment's hesitation, he decided the risk was necessary. He carefully arranged the outer ring, aligning the symbol that resembled a shield with the top position. Then he positioned the three hands in the complex pattern illustrated in the ancient book, the gold and silver hands crossing at one point, the copper hand pointing in yet another direction. When the configuration was complete, he whispered the activation word his grandfather had taught him, a word in a language no one in Millbrook had spoken for centuries. The effect was immediate and more intense than any previous use of the key. The air around him seemed to thicken and shimmer, light bending in impossible ways. Images formed, not just in the air above the key as before, but surrounding him on all sides, as if he stood in the center of a sphere of visions. In these visions, he saw the Independence Day celebration, the town square filled with people, flags waving, the band playing. He saw his friends, all 7 of them, gathered near the bandstand. He saw the collector moving through the crowd, purpose in his stride, heading toward Thomas. The vision sharpened, focusing on the mayor's son. In his mind's eye, Michael saw the collector approach Thomas, saw him speak words that caused the boy's face to pale, saw Thomas nod and follow the man away from the crowd, toward the edge of the square where the shadows were deeper. The vision shifted, showing a different scene, the cemetery, the fresh grave he had glimpsed before, but now he could read the name on the simple headstone, Thomas Whittaker, beloved son, 1896-1908. Michael gasped, the vision so vivid it felt as if he were standing before the actual grave. The collector's threat echoed in his mind. "Someone will pay the price. Perhaps one of your little friends, Thomas." The collector planned to use Thomas to force Michael to surrender the key. The visions began to fade, the shimmering air returning to normal. But as the last images disappeared, Michael felt a cold presence, as if someone, something, had become aware of him. The collector had sensed his use of the key, just as Mr. Crawford had warned. Michael quickly returned the key to his pocket, his heart pounding. He knew now what would happen tomorrow if he didn't act. Thomas Whittaker, the mayor's son, his friend, would die, unless Michael gave up the timekeeper's key. But surrendering the key to the collector would have consequences far beyond one life, no matter how precious that life might be. The burden of the timekeeper was knowing the difference between what could be changed and what should be changed. His grandfather's words, echoed by Mr. Crawford, weighed heavily on his young shoulders. Michael lay awake for hours, turning the problem over in his mind, searching for a solution that would save Thomas without allowing the key to fall into the collector's hands. Eventually, exhaustion claimed him, and he fell into a troubled sleep, the timekeeper's key still clutched in his right hand. Independence Day dawned bright and clear, the sky a perfect blue that promised ideal conditions for the town's celebration. Flags fluttered from every building in Millbrook, and the streets were already busy with people heading toward the town square for the morning's events. Peter waited anxiously at the agreed meeting place by the bandstand, scanning the crowd for any sign of Michael. The others arrived one by one, Eleanor in a white dress with red and blue ribbons, Lillian similarly patriotically attired, the Wilson twins in matching outfits, Sarah with a new hair ribbon, Bobby with his face unusually clean for once. Thomas arrived with his father, Mayor Whittaker, who was busy greeting constituents and checking last-minute arrangements for the celebration. When the mayor moved away to consult with the band director, Thomas joined his friends. "Where's Michael?" he asked, noticing the absence. Peter shrugged, trying to hide his growing concern. "Not here yet," he said, continuing to scan the crowd. The celebration began with a speech from Mayor Whitaker, followed by a patriotic performance from the Millbrook Brass Band. The children listened politely, though their attention wandered occasionally. Peter barely heard any of it, his mind occupied with worry about Michael and the vision he had seen, the vision involving Thomas. As the formal portion of the morning's events concluded and the crowd began to disperse toward various games and refreshment stands set up around the square, Peter finally spotted Michael approaching from the direction of his home. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes suggesting a night of poor sleep, but his expression was determined. "Michael!" Peter called, waving to catch his attention. Michael joined the group, greeting everyone with a nod. His right hand was in his pocket as usual, but there was a tension in his posture that hadn't been there before. "You nearly missed everything," Sarah told him. "The mayor's speech was so long I thought my legs would fall off from standing still." "Sorry," Michael said distractedly. "Overslept." The children began to discuss which activities to try first. The sack race was scheduled for noon, the pie-eating contest for 2 o'clock. Various games of skill and chance were already in operation around the square. Ring toss, horseshoes, a shooting gallery with cork guns. As they debated their options, Peter pulled Michael slightly aside. "Did you use it?" he whispered. "The configuration my father showed you." Michael nodded grimly. "It's Thomas," he said, his voice barely audible over the festive noise around them. "The collector is going to use him to get to me, to get the key." Peter felt a chill despite the warm summer day. "We have to warn him." "And tell him what?" Michael asked. "That a man is going to hurt him to get a magical timepiece? He'd never believe us." He shook his head. "No, I have to handle this myself. I have a plan." Before Peter could ask what this plan entailed, Thomas called them back to the group. "We've decided to try the ring toss first," he announced. "Then maybe the shooting gallery." The 8 children moved through the crowded square toward the ring toss booth, where they joined the line of people waiting to test their skill. As they waited, Peter noticed Michael scanning the crowd, his expression alert and watchful. Following his gaze, Peter spotted the collector, Mr. Black, standing near the edge of the square, observing them. When he noticed Peter looking at him, he smiled that same cold smile and tipped his hat slightly. "He's here," Peter whispered to Michael. "I know," Michael replied tensely. "He's waiting for the right moment, probably when there's something happening that will draw everyone's attention away from Thomas." The ring toss provided a welcome distraction from their worries. Each child took turns throwing wooden rings, attempting to land them around the necks of bottles arranged on a table. Bobby proved unexpectedly skilled at the game, winning a small prize, a tin whistle that he immediately began to play, much to everyone's amusement and occasional annoyance. As the morning progressed into afternoon, the celebration grew more lively. The town square was filled with people, music played continuously from the bandstand, and the smells of food, roasted corn, barbecued meats, fresh bread, and sweet treats filled the air. The children moved from one activity to another, winning small prizes, eating treats purchased with pennies saved for the occasion, and generally enjoying the festivities. But through it all, Michael remained vigilant, his eyes constantly searching the crowd for the collector, his hand never leaving his right pocket where the timekeeper's key rested. As 2 o'clock approached, Bobby declared his intention to enter the pie-eating contest. "I've been practicing all year for this," he announced proudly, patting his stomach. "I've got a special technique." "What technique could there possibly be for eating pie?" Eleanor asked skeptically. "It's all in the breathing," Bobby explained seriously. "You have to breathe through your nose while you eat, and take small bites, but take them quickly. Amateurs always try to take big mouthfuls and end up choking." This explanation was met with good-natured teasing, but Bobby was undeterred. As they made their way toward the area where the contest would be held, Michael suddenly tensed. The collector was moving through the crowd, heading in their direction with purposeful strides. "Peter," Michael said urgently, "take the others to see the pie-eating contest. I need to talk to Thomas alone for a minute." Peter hesitated, understanding the danger but reluctant to leave his friends. "Are you sure?" Michael nodded firmly. "It's the only way. Go, quickly, before he gets here." Peter reluctantly complied, herding the others toward the pie-eating contest. "Come on, we need to get good spots to watch Bobby," he urged. "Michael and Thomas will catch up." As the others moved away, Thomas looked at Michael questioningly. "What's going on? You've been acting strange all day." Michael took a deep breath. "Thomas, I need to tell you something important. It's going to sound crazy, but I need you to trust me." Before he could continue, a shadow fell over them. The collector stood there, his tall figure blocking the sun, his thin lips curved in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thomas Whitaker," he said smoothly, "the mayor's son, and Michael Hargrove, just the young man I've been looking for." Thomas, raised to be polite to adults, nodded respectfully. "Good afternoon, Mr. Black. Your father has organized a magnificent celebration." The collector continued, apparently making casual conversation. "I was just admiring the preparations for the fireworks display. Quite elaborate. I understand they've been set up on the roof of the town hall for maximum visibility." "Yes, sir," Thomas confirmed. "Father ordered them specially from New York City." "Fascinating," the collector said, though his eyes never left Michael. "I wonder if you boys would be interested in seeing them up close. I've been given a special tour as a visitor to your fine town. I'd be happy to show you." The invitation was directed at both boys, but the underlying intent was clear to Michael. The collector was trying to isolate them, to get them away from the crowd. "Thank you, sir," Michael said carefully. "But we're supposed to meet our friends for the pie-eating contest." "Oh, that won't start for a while yet," the collector said dismissively. "Plenty of time for a quick look at the fireworks. It's a rare opportunity. What do you say, Thomas? Wouldn't you like to see them up close?" Thomas hesitated, clearly tempted by the offer. "Well, I suppose a quick look wouldn't hurt." "Actually," Michael interrupted, "I've just remembered something important. Thomas, your father was looking for you earlier. Something about a special announcement he wants you to be present for." Thomas looked surprised. "He didn't mention anything to me. He told me to tell you if I saw you," Michael improvised. "It must have slipped my mind until now. He said it was urgent." The collector's expression hardened slightly, his plan being derailed. "I'm sure whatever it is can wait," he said. The mayor would want his son to have this special experience. But Thomas, dutiful son that he was already shaking his head. "I'm sorry, Mr. Black. If my father needs me, I should go to him right away. Perhaps another time." He turned to Michael. "Do you know where he is?" "At the bandstand, I think," Michael said. "I'll walk with you." The collector's eyes narrowed, his genial mask slipping momentarily to reveal the cold calculation beneath. "Another time, then," he said, his tone carrying a hint of threat, his gaze locked with Michael's. "We will continue our discussion later, young Mr. Hargrove. Count on it." As the collector walked away, Thomas looked at Michael curiously. "What was that all about? And why did you make up that story about my father looking for me?" Michael hesitated. How much could he tell Thomas without revealing the full truth about the timekeeper's key? "I don't trust that man," he said finally. "There's something wrong about him. I didn't think you should go anywhere alone with him." Thomas frowned, considering this. He did seem a bit strange, he acknowledged, though I can't put my finger on why. He shrugged. "Well, since we're heading to the bandstand anyway, we might as well find my father. He might actually have something to tell me." Michael nodded, relieved that his improvised plan had worked for the moment, but he knew the danger wasn't past. The collector would try again, and next time he might not be so easily thwarted. They found Mayor Whitaker at the bandstand, deep in conversation with several town dignitaries. He looked surprised when Thomas approached and asked if he had been looking for him. "No, son, not at all," the mayor said, glancing curiously at Michael. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, sir," Thomas replied, though he gave Michael a questioning look. "Just a misunderstanding, I guess." With the immediate danger averted, the boys rejoined their friends at the pie-eating contest, where Bobby was preparing to take his place at the long table set up for the participants. The contest was open to children 12 and under, and Bobby was one of 10 contestants eyeing the cherry pies placed before them with varying degrees of confidence and apprehension. "There you are," Peter exclaimed when he saw Michael and Thomas approaching. His eyes asked a silent question. "What happened?" Michael gave a small nod to indicate that all was well for the moment, but his expression remained tense. The collector was still out there, still determined to acquire the timekeeper's key, and still willing to harm Thomas to get it. As the pie-eating contest began, with Bobby attacking his cherry pie with surprising strategic precision, Michael pulled Peter aside. "I need to use the key again," he whispered. "There's another configuration, one my grandfather showed me before he died. It might help us." Peter looked alarmed. "But if you use it, the collector will sense it, won't he? Like before?" "Yes," Michael acknowledged. "But I don't see another choice." He's not going to give up, and I can't watch all of you every moment. He glanced at Thomas, who was cheering Bobby on with the others. Especially not Thomas. Peter hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. What do you need me to do? Create a distraction, Michael said. Something that will keep everyone's attention away from me for a few minutes. And watch for the collector. If you see him coming this way, warn me immediately. While Peter considered what kind of distraction would be effective, the pie-eating contest continued with messy enthusiasm. Bobby was holding his own against the competition, his special technique apparently serving him well. The spectators cheered the contestants on, laughing at their cherry-stained faces and the occasional dramatic groans as the pies gradually disappeared. Peter's opportunity came when Bobby, in a burst of competitive spirit, finished his pie with a flourish, throwing his hands in the air and accidentally knocking over a glass of water that had been placed beside his plate. The water spilled across the table, causing several contestants to jump back in surprise. In the ensuing confusion, Peter pointed and shouted, "Bobby's won! Bobby's won!" causing everyone's attention to turn toward the pie-eating table. Michael seized the moment, stepping back into the shadow of a nearby stall. He withdrew the timekeeper's key from his pocket and quickly aligned the symbols and hands in the configuration his grandfather had taught him, a pattern not found in any book, passed down only from timekeeper to timekeeper. As he whispered the activation word, the key began to glow with an inner light, the metal warming in his hand. Unlike previous uses, there were no visions, no glimpses of past or future. Instead, Michael felt a surge of energy flowing from the key into his body, a sense of connection to something vast and ancient. For a brief, dizzying moment, he could feel the flow of time itself, not as a linear progression but as a complex web of moments, all interconnected, all influencing each other. He understood in that moment what his grandfather had meant about maintaining the balance. The glow faded, but the warmth of the key remained, and with it a new awareness. Michael could sense the collector's presence in the crowd, could feel his malevolent intent like a dark stain on the bright fabric of the celebration. More importantly, he now knew what he had to do. He returned the key to his pocket and rejoined his friends just as the judges were declaring Bobby the winner of the pie-eating contest. Bobby stood proudly, his face smeared with cherry filling, accepting a small trophy and the cheers of the crowd. "Congratulations," Michael said, clapping Bobby on the shoulder. "Thanks," Bobby replied through a final mouthful of pie. "Told you I had a technique." As Bobby was led away to clean his face before the official photograph was taken, Peter approached Michael. "Did it work?" he asked quietly. "Whatever you were trying to do?" Michael nodded. "I know how to stop him now," he said, "but I'll need your help, and we need to get Thomas somewhere safe." "What's the plan?" Michael explained quickly, outlining what needed to be done. Peter listened intently, his expression growing more serious with each detail. "That's dangerous," he said when Michael had finished. "Are you sure it will work?" "No," Michael admitted, "but it's the best chance we have. The key showed me this path." Peter nodded solemnly. "I'll help. What do you need me to do first?" "Find Thomas," Michael instructed. "Tell him we need to talk to him privately. Bring him to the library. Your father should be there. He'll help keep Thomas safe while we deal with the collector." As Peter went to find Thomas, Michael scanned the crowd once more, using his newly enhanced awareness to locate the collector. He found him near the edge of the square, watching the celebration with apparent casualness, but with a predatory intentness that was obvious to Michael's heightened senses. The collector suddenly stiffened, his head turning sharply in Michael's direction. He had sensed the recent use of the key. Their eyes met across the crowded square, and the collector smiled, a cold, confident smile that suggested he believed victory was near. Michael held his gaze steadily, then deliberately turned away, moving through the crowd toward the edge of the square opposite from where the collector stood. It was a challenge, a lure, and he knew the man would follow. The plan was in motion. Now everything depended on timing, courage, and the power of the timekeeper's key. Peter found Thomas watching a display of horsemanship in a temporarily fenced area at one end of the square. The mayor's son was absorbed in the spectacle, applauding as a rider performed a particularly impressive feat of balance. "Thomas," Peter said urgently, "I need you to come with me. It's important." Thomas turned, surprised by Peter's serious tone. "What's wrong?" "I can't explain here," Peter said, glancing around to ensure the collector wasn't nearby. "Please, just trust me. We need to go to the library. My father's there and Michael will meet us." Something in Peter's manner convinced Thomas of the urgency. Without further questions, he followed Peter through the crowd, away from the celebration and toward the town library. The library was closed for the holiday, but Mr. Crawford was indeed there, having been alerted to the plan by Michael earlier that morning. He admitted the boys through the side entrance, locking the door behind them. "Where's Michael?" Thomas asked, now thoroughly confused and a little alarmed. "What's going on?" Mr. Crawford led them to his private office at the back of the library, a small room lined with books and dominated by a large desk. "Sit down, Thomas," he said gently. "There's something you need to know." While Mr. Crawford began explaining to a bewildered Thomas about the timekeeper's key and the threat posed by the collector, Michael was implementing his part of the plan. He moved purposefully through the streets of Millbrook, away from the town square and the celebration, heading toward a specific destination, the old oak tree where the children met each morning. He could sense the collector following at a distance, moving with the silent precision of a predator stalking its prey. This was exactly what Michael wanted, drawing the man away from the crowded celebration, away from innocent bystanders who might be harmed, away from Thomas. The streets grew quieter as he moved further from the town center, the sounds of the celebration fading behind him. When he reached the oak tree, he stopped and turned, waiting. The timekeeper's key was warm in his right pocket, its energy pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. He didn't have to wait long. The collector appeared at the end of the lane, walking unhurriedly toward the oak tree, his thin figure silhouetted against the afternoon sky. When he reached Michael, he stopped a few paces away, his cold eyes gleaming with anticipation. "You've led me a merry chase, young Mr. Hargrove," he said, his cultured voice carrying a hint of mockery. "But it ends here. The key, if you please." Michael stood his ground, one hand in his right pocket, gripping the timekeeper's key. "Why do you want it?" he asked, partly to stall for time, partly out of genuine curiosity. "What would you do with it?" The collector smiled thinly. "What would I do with the power to control time itself? Everything. Reshape the world according to my design. Correct the imperfections in the natural order." His eyes took on a fanatical gleam. "The keys were created to maintain balance, but balance is overrated. Progress requires change, and change requires disruption. The keys weren't meant for that," Michael said. "They're meant to protect, to preserve what's good, to allow change only where it's needed." "And who decides what's needed?" the collector countered. "Old men like your grandfather hiding in small towns, making minor adjustments while the world cries out for true transformation?" He shook his head in disgust. "The keys belong in the hands of someone with vision, someone who can see the grand pattern and is willing to make the necessary changes, regardless of the cost." "At what cost?" Michael asked, his young voice surprisingly steady. "The life of Thomas Whitaker? The lives of how many others?" The collector's expression hardened. "Sacrifices are inevitable in any worthwhile endeavor. Your friend Thomas is merely one small piece in a much larger game." He took a step closer. "Now, enough talk. Give me the key, or your friend will suffer the consequences." "I don't think so," Michael said, drawing the timekeeper's key from his pocket. The collector's eyes lit up with hunger at the sight of the brass device, its intricate symbols catching the afternoon light. "At last," he breathed, reaching out a hand. But Michael didn't surrender the key. Instead, he quickly aligned a specific symbol with the top position and arranged the three metal hands in a configuration he had never used before, the most powerful and dangerous one his grandfather had taught him. "What are you doing?" the collector demanded, suddenly wary. "Stop that immediately." Michael whispered the activation word, and the world around them shifted. The oak tree behind Michael began to glow with the same inner light he had seen the night he showed Peter the doorway in its trunk. The air shimmered and thickened, time itself seeming to bend around them. "No!" the collector shouted, lunging forward to grab the key. But he was too late. The doorway in the oak tree opened fully, a portal of swirling light and shadow that pulled at them both like a powerful tide. The collector fought against the pull, his face contorted with rage and fear. "You fool!" he snarled at Michael. "You don't know what you're doing. That configuration is meant for doorkeepers, not timekeepers." "I know exactly what I'm doing," Michael replied calmly, though it took all his strength to remain standing against the pull of the doorway. "My grandfather wasn't just a timekeeper. He was a guardian of all the keys. He showed me how to create a one-way door, a door that leads to a place between times, where you can never harm anyone again." The collector's eyes widened in genuine fear. "You can't. You'll be trapped too." Michael shook his head. "No. The blood of the Hargroves protects me. But you've abused the keys you've stolen, twisted their purpose. They'll offer you no protection there." The pull of the doorway intensified, focused now entirely on the collector. His feet began to slide across the ground as the portal exerted its inexorable force. "Wait!" he cried desperately. "We can share the power. Together, we could reshape reality itself." Michael remained unmoved. "The keys aren't about power. They're about responsibility." With a final desperate cry, the collector lost his battle against the portal's pull. He was drawn backward into the swirling light, his form stretching and distorting until, with a sound like thunder, he vanished completely into the doorway. The moment he disappeared, Michael quickly readjusted the key, aligning a different symbol with the top position. The doorway began to close, the light fading, the pull diminishing until the oak tree was once again just an oak tree, solid and ordinary in the late afternoon sun. Michael stood motionless for several long moments, the timekeeper's key warm in his hand. He had done it. The collector was gone, trapped in a place between times where he could harm no one. Thomas was safe. They were all safe. But the victory came with a sobering awareness. The power of the key was greater than he had imagined, and the responsibility heavier. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind. The burden of the timekeeper is knowing the difference between what can be changed and what should be changed. With a deep breath, he returned the key to his right pocket and turned toward town. There was still much to do, explanations to give, though not complete ones, and preparations to make for whatever challenges might come next. For the collector was not the only threat in the world, merely the most immediate. When Michael reached the library, he found Thomas, Peter, and Mr. Crawford waiting anxiously. Thomas's expression was a mixture of disbelief, awe, and lingering confusion, the natural reaction of someone whose understanding of the world had just been fundamentally altered. "Is it done?" Mr. Crawford asked quietly as Michael entered. Michael nodded. "He's gone, trapped in the space between times." "And the key?" Michael patted his right pocket. "Safe, where it belongs." Thomas stepped forward, his face serious. "Peter and his father have been telling me incredible things about that brass thing in your pocket, about what it can do." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "About how that man, the collector, was going to harm me to get it from you." "I'm sorry you were drawn into this, Thomas," Michael said sincerely. "It wasn't supposed to touch any of you." Thomas shook his head. "Don't apologize. Peter says you saved my life." He extended his hand formally. "Thank you." Michael took the offered hand, a silent understanding passing between them. The burden of the timekeeper might be his alone to bear, but friendship, true friendship, could make that burden lighter. "What happens now?" Peter asked, looking between Michael and his father. Mr. Crawford sighed. "Life continues. The celebration is still ongoing. People are waiting for the fireworks display at sunset, and we should be there," Michael said with surprising firmness. "All of us, together. We can't let what's happened, what almost happened, steal this day from us." Thomas nodded in agreement. "Father would be disappointed if I missed his grand finale." The four of them left the library together, heading back toward the town square where the Independence Day celebration continued unabated, the townspeople blissfully unaware of the danger that had threatened them and the ancient powers that had been wielded in their midst. They found the other children, Eleanor, Lillian, the Wilson twins, Sarah, and Bobby, gathered near the bandstand, comparing prizes won at various games and discussing the upcoming fireworks display. "Where have you all been?" Sarah demanded when she spotted them. "You missed Bobby getting his picture taken with the mayor for winning the pie-eating contest." "Just taking care of some business," Thomas said with a glance at Michael. "Sorry we missed your moment of glory, Bobby." Bobby puffed out his chest proudly. "The mayor said he's never seen anyone eat pie with such strategic precision." Those were his exact words. The conversation flowed naturally from there, the 8 children reunited, their bond somehow stronger for the unseen trial 3 of them had faced. As twilight approached, they claimed a prime spot on the town green from which to view the fireworks. Mayor Whitaker delivered a final speech from the bandstand, thanking everyone for their participation and promising a spectacular display to conclude the celebration. Thomas stood a little taller at his father's words, a new appreciation for the man evident in his expression. When darkness fell, the first rockets soared into the sky, exploding in bursts of red, white, and blue against the velvet backdrop of night. The crowd gasped and applauded, faces turned upward in wonder. Michael stood slightly apart from the others, as was his habit, his right hand in his pocket, fingers wrapped around the timekeeper's key. But there was a difference now, a sense of purpose, of acceptance. The key was his burden, yes, but also his inheritance, his responsibility, his destiny. Peter joined him, speaking softly so the others wouldn't hear. Will there be others? Other collectors or whatever, coming for the key? Michael nodded. Eventually. The key is too powerful to remain uncoveted, but we'll be ready. He glanced at his friend. You and me, timekeeper and witness. Peter nodded solemnly, accepting his role in this ancient tradition. And the others? Will you tell them? Michael watched as another firework exploded overhead, illuminating his friends' upturned faces in brief colored light. Not everything, not yet. They deserve their childhood, their innocence, for as long as possible. He smiled slightly. But someday, perhaps, when the time is right. As the fireworks continued to paint the sky with ephemeral beauty, Michael felt a strange peace settle over him. The future stretched before him, full of unknown challenges and responsibilities, but also full of friendship, discovery, and purpose. The timekeeper's key was warm in his pocket, a constant reminder of the power he now wielded and the duty that came with it. Time itself was in his hands, not to control or manipulate for selfish ends, but to protect, to preserve, to guide along its proper course. Above them, the final barrage of fireworks illuminated the night, casting the 8 children in a tableau of light and shadow. To casual observers, they were simply 8 friends enjoying a summer celebration together. No one would notice anything unusual about them until, perhaps, they glanced at the 5th child's right pocket, where an ancient brass device caught the reflected light of the fireworks, its symbols momentarily visible before being hidden once more in shadow. The next morning, the 8 children gathered as usual at the old oak tree. If anyone noticed a slight change in their dynamics, Michael standing a bit closer to the group, Thomas treating him with newfound respect, Peter watching over them all with quiet attentiveness, they made no comment. What shall we do today? Thomas asked, just as he had every morning of their summer holiday. Various suggestions were offered and debated with the usual enthusiasm. Eventually a consensus was reached, and the children set off on another day's adventure, moving in a loose group through Whitaker Woods. As they walked, Sarah suddenly pointed to something ahead. Look, Mr. Harper's cherry trees have ripened again already. Race you to the top of the hill. The challenge spurred most of the children into action, running ahead with shouts of excitement. Only Michael and Peter remained walking at a normal pace. Everything feels different now, Peter observed quietly. The same, but different. Michael nodded, his hand in his right pocket, fingers wrapped around the timekeeper's key. That's how it is when you glimpse the true nature of things, he said. The world is exactly as it was before, but you see it differently. They continued in companionable silence for a moment. Then Michael smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that transformed his usually serious face. Come on, he said, breaking into a run. We should catch up. There are cherries to pick, games to play, summers to enjoy. Peter matched his pace, and together they ran to join their friends, who waited for them at the crest of Harper's Hill, silhouetted against the endless blue of a perfect summer sky. In the distance, Millbrook lay spread before them, peaceful and unaware of how close it had come to tragedy, or of the ancient power that now protected it through the most unassuming of guardians, a 10-year-old boy with a brass device in his right pocket and the weight of time itself on his young shoulders. The children's laughter echoed across the hillside as they began picking cherries, their voices carried on the summer breeze like promises of adventures yet to come. And in his right pocket, Michael's hand closed around the timekeeper's key, its warmth a reminder of both burden and blessing, of power and responsibility, of a destiny now fully embraced. As summer days continued to unfold in Millbrook, life returned to a semblance of normality for the 8 children. They met each morning at the oak tree, spent their days in play and exploration, and returned to their homes each evening with sun-browned skin and memories of shared adventures. But beneath this familiar pattern, subtle changes had taken root. Thomas, Eleanor, and Lillian sometimes looked at Michael with curious expressions when they thought he wasn't watching, as if trying to solve a puzzle they couldn't quite articulate. The Wilson twins and Sarah remained largely oblivious, accepting Michael's occasional distraction or sudden insights without question. Bobby noticed more than he let on, his jovial exterior hiding a surprisingly perceptive mind. And Peter, of course, knew everything, or nearly everything. As Michael's designated witness, he was privy to the secrets of the timekeeper's key, to the responsibilities it entailed, and to the occasional glimpses of past and future that Michael shared with him in private moments. Mr. Crawford continued his role as chronicler, recording the events surrounding the collector's defeat in the ancient ledger that had been in his family for generations. Sometimes in the evening hours when the library was closed, he would summon Michael and Peter to his apartment for lessons in the history and proper use of the key. The timekeeper's greatest challenge, he told them during one such session, is not in knowing how to use the key, but in knowing when to use it. Every intervention, no matter how small, creates ripples that spread outward in ways we cannot always predict. Michael nodded solemnly, the key a constant weight in his right pocket. My grandfather used to say something similar. He said time wants to flow in certain patterns, and fighting against those patterns can cause more harm than good. Precisely, Mr. Crawford agreed. The key is not meant to reshape time according to our desires, but to protect its essential flow from those who would disrupt it for selfish ends. These lessons continued throughout the summer, supplementing the more carefree days spent with the other children. Michael absorbed them eagerly, growing more comfortable with his role as timekeeper with each passing day. There were moments, of course, when the burden felt heavy, when he glimpsed potential dangers that he could prevent but chose not to, understanding that some events, even painful ones, were necessary parts of time's proper flow. In those moments, Peter's quiet support and Mr. Crawford's guidance were invaluable. As July gave way to August and the lazy rhythm of summer began to quicken with the approaching school year, Michael found himself increasingly aware of the preciousness of these days with his friends. The key had shown him glimpses of their futures, separate paths that would eventually lead them away from Millbrook and from each other. Thomas would follow in his father's footsteps, entering politics and eventually representing their district in the state legislature. Eleanor would attend a prestigious women's college and become one of the first female physicians in the county. Lillian would marry young and move to Boston with her husband, a kindly minister much like her father. The Wilson twins would take different paths for the first time in their lives, James joining the army and serving overseas, Joseph staying in Millbrook to run the family business. Sarah would become a teacher, her boundless energy channeled into inspiring generations of Millbrook's children. Bobby would travel widely before returning to town as the proprietor of a successful automobile dealership, his jovial nature making him a beloved local figure. And Peter, loyal Peter, would remain in Millbrook, taking over the library from his father and continuing the Crawford family tradition as chronicler to the timekeeper. Michael himself would stay in Millbrook as well, the timekeeper's duties binding him to the place where the key had been entrusted to him. He would live a quiet life in the eyes of the town, unremarkable save for his occasional uncanny ability to be in the right place at the right time to prevent accidents or avert tragedies. These futures were not fixed. The key had shown him variations, alternate paths that might unfold depending on choices yet to be made, but the general shape of their lives had a certain inevitability that Michael had come to accept. For now, though, they were still 8 children enjoying the timeless pleasures of a summer in a small town in 1908. They still raced each other to the creek, still caught salamanders in Bobby's homemade trap, still gathered cherries from Mr. Harper's trees, still argued about whether plants could hear and whether it was disrespectful to run in the cemetery. And if sometimes Michael seemed older than his years, if sometimes his gaze lingered on his friends with a wistfulness that suggested knowledge beyond his age, none of them remarked upon it. Children accept the peculiarities of their companions with an ease that adults often lose. On the last day of August, with school looming on the horizon, the 8 children gathered for one final summer adventure. They packed lunches, filled canteens with water, and set off for Blackwater Pond, a destination at the far edge of the woods that they had been saving for a special occasion. The pond was rumored to be bottomless, its waters dark and mysterious. Local legend held that it had formed overnight during a terrible storm in the previous century, appearing where once there had been only forest. Some of the older residents of Millbrook claimed it was haunted, though they were vague about the nature of the haunting. My father says it's just a normal pond, Thomas informed the others as they hiked through the woods. The stories are just to keep children from swimming there alone. My cousin went there last summer, Bobby countered. He said he saw lights moving beneath the surface like lanterns carried by underwater people. Underwater people? Eleanor scoffed. That's scientifically impossible. Maybe they're ghosts, Sarah suggested with relish. The spirits of people who drowned there. No one's drowned there, James Wilson pointed out reasonably. At least not that anyone knows of. That we know of, his twin corrected with dramatic emphasis. The debate continued as they walked, theories growing more elaborate with each step. Michael listened with amusement, the key warm in his pocket. He knew the truth about Blackwater Pond, had seen it in visions granted by the key, but he kept this knowledge to himself. Some mysteries were meant to be experienced firsthand. They reached the pond just before noon, emerging from the dense woods into a clearing where the dark waters spread before them, still and reflective as a mirror. Ancient trees surrounded the pond, their branches reaching out over the water as if attempting to touch their own reflections. It's beautiful, Lillian breathed, expressing what they all felt. The children spread their blankets on a grassy area near the shore and unpacked their lunches. As they ate, the conversation turned to the coming school year. New teachers, new books, new challenges. Miss Abernathy is retiring, Eleanor informed them. Father says the new teacher is coming all the way from New York City. I heard she's very strict, Sarah added. My mother met her when she came to order school supplies at the shop. I'm going to be in your class this year, Peter told Michael. Father convinced the school board to let me skip a grade. Michael smiled at this news. Having Peter in his class would make the school days more bearable, especially with the additional responsibility of the timekeeper's duties now resting on his shoulders. After lunch, the children explored the perimeter of the pond, skipping stones across its dark surface and searching for interesting specimens among the shoreline vegetation. Bobby claimed to have found a frog of unusual size, though it jumped away before anyone else could verify his discovery. As the afternoon waned, they gathered on a large, flat rock that jutted into the pond, dangling their feet in the cool water and watching dragonflies skim across the surface. I wish summer could last forever, Sarah sighed, expressing a sentiment they all shared. Nothing lasts forever, Michael said quietly, his hand in his right pocket. But that's what makes things precious. The others looked at him with varying degrees of surprise. It was an unusually philosophical statement from one so young, though it fit with the slightly altered perception they had of Michael since the Independence Day celebration. Well, I think this has been the best summer ever, Bobby declared, breaking the momentary solemnity. And next summer will be even better. This optimistic prediction was met with general agreement, and the conversation turned to plans for next year's adventures, places they hadn't yet explored, games they hadn't yet played, challenges they hadn't yet overcome. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they reluctantly gathered their belongings and prepared for the long walk back to town. Before leaving, they stood together at the edge of the pond for one final look at its mysterious waters. We should take a photograph, Thomas suggested suddenly, to remember the day. With what camera? Eleanor asked practically. My father has one, Thomas replied. One of those new Kodak brownies. He's been teaching me to use it. He reached into his satchel and produced a small box camera. I brought it along, just in case we saw something worth photographing. The children arranged themselves on the flat rock, positioning to fit within the camera's viewfinder. Thomas set up the camera on a tree stump, adjusted the simple controls, and used the timer feature to allow himself to join the group before the shutter clicked. Everyone smile, he called as he took his place among them. 8 children smiled into the lens, frozen for a moment in time. Thomas with his dignified posture, Eleanor and Lillian in their neat dresses, the Wilson twins with identical grins, Sarah with wind-blown hair, Bobby with a smudge of dirt on his cheek from his earlier frog hunt, Peter with his ever-present book tucked under one arm, and Michael standing fifth from the left, one hand in his right pocket where the timekeeper's key rested, its brass surface warm against his fingers. The camera's shutter clicked, capturing the image that would, years later, become the photograph described at the beginning of our story. A photograph of 8 children from the summer of 1908, playing happily at the edge of a mysterious pond. A photograph that seems entirely ordinary until you notice the 5th child's right pocket and the slight but unmistakable glow emanating from within it. A glow that shouldn't be visible in a black and white photograph, yet somehow is. A glow that suggests something extraordinary hidden just beneath the surface of an otherwise ordinary moment in time. The camera pans slowly across the faded sepia image one last time, lingering on each child's face before settling on Michael Hargrove, the fifth child, the timekeeper, the protector of moments. And as we look closely, we can just make out the slight bulge in his right pocket, where an ancient brass device with strange symbols catches the light in a way that seems to transcend the limitations of photography, of time itself. A reminder that extraordinary things often hide in the most ordinary places, waiting to be noticed by those with eyes to see. 8 children in 1908, playing happily, until you notice the fifth one's right pocket and the mystery it contains.